Welcome to Let's Talk Legal, where the law gets unpacked without the courtroom drama. Brought to you by NVR Attorneys, in association with Gold FM, this series tackles real legal issues, real-life situations, and the questions people usually Google at 2 a.m. Hosted by experienced attorneys who believe the law should make sense, not sound intimidating. This is legal insight, minus the jargon. Let's talk legal.
It's Wednesday, and that means it is time for another episode, a brand new episode of Let's Talk Legal, brought to you by NVR Attorneys. And in studio again, I do have André Styger. André, as always, an absolute pleasure.
Jessica, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure being with you.
Now, André, I think today we're going to be covering a topic that I can only imagine you see happening quite a bit, in the industry that you deal with. And I must say, just thinking on top of my head, I can already point out a few people that I know personally that's had an issue with this once, twice, or even a good couple of times. And that is, something to do with your neighbors. So I also think you get this question quite often. After someone has bought a house and now their neighbor has decided to convert their house into a tavern, a panel beater business, what can one do?
Well, Jessica, there's a lot of ways to approach this. Let's just say your neighbor is creating a nuisance,
yes,
in the sense of noise.
Yes.
Then you still have the regulations that was promulgated under the Pollution Act, believe it or not, where you can go to the police and lay a charge of, a disturbance. People think it doesn't exist anymore. It does. So that is just if it's a noisy neighbor. But when it comes down to but I went to a suburb. I saw it was a nice white cul-de-sac, and I thought, I'm going to raise my kids here, so I'm buying the house, and the next thing I know, there's a tavern, some business, panel beating as an example, next door. And all of a sudden, what I envisaged as far as what I invested in is no longer, the whole thing changes. And then that's when it's important to look at your township planning, your zoning, and what I want to talk about today, maybe given that example, is title deed conditions. Because whenever you buy a house, a lot of people know that you get a title deed,
yes,
but very few people read it. Yeah. And the document you get, that title deed that proves your ownership, has a lot of conditions on it. Now, in the older towns like Oudendaalsrus and Rich and so on, these are very few because it was historic towns. But in Welkom, which is basically one of the most modern cities, if not in the world, at least in South Africa, because it only established recently in certain terms, you have proper drafted title deed conditions. Now, I just grabbed the title deed in our office, and it applies to an earth in Church Street in Doorn, here in Welkom. And I just quickly glanced through it, and I look at the title deed conditions that's typical for a suburb in Welkom in that area. If I can just maybe point out one or two. You have the title deed stating that the following conditions will apply on all urban, it says, in the township area, which is in this case Doorn, and it's in favor of the applicant, which was basically the municipality and then the township's board back then. Then it says here, neither the owner nor any person shall do or suffer to be done on the earth anything which shall be a public or private nuisance. So it's in black and white in your title deed, applying to everybody. If I can just point out a few more, which will apply to the example we've mentioned here. It says the earth shall not be subdivided without permission, nor shall the earth be used for any other purpose than assigned to it. So now it's been assigned to as a residential suburb. That was the purpose of the planning. And now you are restricted by the title deed to use it for anything else. Then it gets more interesting. Things that I have never met anybody that knowing about these conditions in these areas. For instance, you're not allowed to put in a borehole on your earth without municipal consent. That's envisaged in your title deed. Okay. Believe it or not, that if you start building, the gravel outside of your yard must be removed in 90 days. That's in black and white. It even goes beyond that you're not allowed to paint your roof aluminium or silver. And the reason for that, interesting enough for those who are curious, is that because the sun reflects on it, on the vehicles driving around, and it might blind them. So your municipality can prohibit you from painting your house certain colors, and the municipality can even insist that you maintain your house. There's conditions in here that says the house should be regularly painted, the fence should be maintained. So that's just to make sure that the suburb doesn't, become dilapidated and so on. Once again, we've got great laws. The application is, however, a different story. Then we come to a condition that I think has been in the news recently, and that is that, if I can quote it, it says, an outbuilding shall be commenced simultaneously with the main building on the earth. So we know certain suburbs in Welkom where somebody buys an earth and then he puts up a little informal house or a shack or whatever you want to call it, with the intention of now I'm going to start building slowly. That is prohibited by the title deed conditions. Your outbuildings must go up simultaneously with your house, and it must be completed within 2 years. That is in the title deed conditions. So if these conditions apply to your suburb, which in Welkom is most of the cases, these are things that can be enforced. Now that brings us to your question. Now I've got this neighbor and he's using it for a different purpose. The in word nowadays is student accommodation, which is just keyword for, converting my house into a block of flats for 40. And then we apply for permission under the pretense of it being student accommodation. And there's a process to be followed, because these conditions I've just read is in favor of the municipality. So the municipality must consent or decline an application. You can't just go ahead and do it by yourself. But for them to do so, there's a process to be followed, and I won't go into that to detail. But you have to notify your neighbors of my intent to use the property for a different purpose, and that's what we're talking about. Why must I notify my neighbors? Because back when I decided to make the investment, I wanted a quiet, silent, loving, whatever residential suburb, and you are changing the face of that suburb. So hence my rights will be impacted one way or another, and I want to be known in the decision of the municipality. Now, this is where the notices must go out and so forth. Unfortunately, more often than not, we find that people just carry on. And then people don't know what their rights are as neighbors. And then they just leave it be, or they just complain to everybody. But what is my right? What can I do? And that is simple. It's that this right is not only registered in favor of the municipality, but as I started out with and pointed out, it's also in favor of everybody in that suburb. So I can go to the municipality, and I've actually advised the client just a few weeks back, and he's been following that process, and said, listen, you are not protecting me, because you have certain rights, but you also have responsibilities that go with that. And that's to make sure that the character of the suburb remains the same. Do your job, or I'm going to take you to court. So you actually take action against the municipality for not enforcing the zoning. But should they still fail to do so, then you have the option. Say, okay, I'm going to take the municipality all the way to court to force them to do their job, and most likely we'll just go full circle where we'll give permission and say, do that. Or I can say, I'm now stepping in, and I will protect my own rights, which was envisaged, because it's not only in favor of the municipality, but also in favor of myself as a neighbor. Unfortunately, with these things, if you just picked up, lawyers are involved, legal fees are involved, and you can't be guaranteed of the outcome of it. So it might be a hefty fine. But in this practical example I had of my client calling me a few weeks back, what he did, he just rallied the neighbors next door, and they pulled together and they instructed attorneys, and this matter has been taken forward because they all said this, and we did not buy here and knew that this area is now going to become that type of suburb, and they're trying to stop that, and they will be successful. I'm confident about that.
Yes. All right. Well, that's a mouthful, but I can only imagine that this is something that, happens more often than what we would like for it to occur.
Unfortunately, and I think for what we're living in, and it's not unique to Machabeng, is the enforcement. The laws are there, everything, it's great, but when it comes to enforcement, we're lacking. And then people have this relative morality. Well, he's doing it, therefore I can do it. And they've been doing it, therefore we do it. And then and until you draw the lines again, it becomes a free-for-all.
Absolutely. And as you said, with our rights, we also have responsibilities, and just to make sure that all of our entire community, is kept up to the certain standard that they would like for it to be upheld. Because
it comes down to investment. If I wanted to be in an industrial area, I would buy an industrial.
Yes, exactly.
So it's protecting my investment and not losing value for probably what was my biggest investment, and that was buying my house.
Absolutely. André, thank you so much for joining me again in studio, and once again, having a conversation about something that is so important. And I think it's always good for, our radio friends to also know that there is things that they can do. There is solutions on how to solve any issues that they might be having. And we definitely look forward to having you in studio again very soon.
Thank you for having me, Jessica.
And that, of course, wraps up this week's edition of Let's Talk Legal, made possible by Newman Van Rooyen Attorneys.
That's it for this episode of Let's Talk Legal. If today's topic hit close to home, don't guess, get advice. You can contact NVR Attorneys for clear, practical legal assistance, or follow the podcast for more conversations that make the law easier to live with. Because knowing where you stand is always better than finding out too late.